Am I supposed to be singing a song here?
I think that's like a self-imposed thing, so if you feel like it, does it make you happy?
I mean, some of the people's comments about how terrible my singing voice is make me happy. If it makes you happy. Anyway, no, I'm not doing that. Hi, Derek Tam-Scott. Oh, sorry.
Good.
Hold on. No, stop. You're not allowed to respond to that. Hi, Derek Tam-Scott. How are you?
Oh, sorry, I didn't know who you were talking to before. I'm glad you added that clarification. Otherwise, it would have been unclear.
It would be unclear. This is Derek Tam-Scott. I am Jason Discount Sandler Cammisa, and we are here for this episode of Carmudgeon. It's been a while.
Has been some minutes.
A long time. It's been a couple minutes. It's a politically charged couple of weeks. You need to stop provoking people to get into trouble, Derek. I've seen your Twitter.
Well, at least I have Twitter. Oh, just kidding. I actually don't have Twitter, but that's voluntary. But I could have Twitter if I wanted, unlike some other people.
Is it because you're too old? Like it's your spirit age is too old to allow you?
I can't see the little keyboard and the buttons and all that. It's too small.
40 characters that would fill 10 screens. I shouldn't joke. I'm getting to that point where I'm probably going to have reading glasses soon. And that's just a terrifying thought. Like it's just what immediately identifies you as being old.
Welcome.
And a couple years ago, I went to an ophthalmologist, and like she did the eye check and everything good. She's like, "You're great. You're totally fine." And I'm like, "Yeah, but I expect I'm going to be blind soon." And she was like, "Oh no, you have plenty of time left. How old are you?" And I think I was 42 at the time. I'm like, "I'm 42." She was like, "Oh, you're fucked. You're going to be blind momentarily." Quote. And I was like, "What?" She thought I was younger than I was. Thank God. But she was like, "Yeah, one of these days, anytime, any day now, you're going to wake up and be like, and that was 3 years ago. So I think
any minute now.
So far, I'm beating the odds. Yeah, but any second now, I'm going to be like that person that's holding my phone like all the way this way. Mm-hmm. That's something you had to worry about 30 years ago spiritually, but you're not going to have to worry about for like 15 years because you're a whippersnapper.
Yes, young whippersnapper. What have you been up to of late?
I have been producing a boatload of video content for Haggerty's YouTube channel. So let me just plug that right now. I think the last time we talked about this, I had just shot the Renault R5 episode of Revelations, which is the new Spotlight, which was cool.
I will say I am embarrassed by how long it took me to identify that the play on Revelations and the like tachometer for the logo. I was like, oh, it took me a minute.
It's Rev and Elations. Get it?
Yeah.
Get it? I was a little worried that name, like, frankly, I loved Spotlight. It was so good, but like I didn't want to call ISSIMI guys that call you basically and be like, "Hey, you, Mr. ISSIMI, I'm going to take all the names." So I'm like, I'll just think of another name. But man, what a pain in the ass that was, because Spotlight was really good.
Aren't you are using one of them though, right?
One of them, yeah. So I was asked to continue. I was asked to ask ISSIMI to continue to use the name Jason Cammisa on the icons for the big show. So like I thought, all right, that's fair. I can do one, but I'll come up with a new name for Spotlight. So that's Revelations, and I came up with a new name for Proper Care and Feeding, which is Know It All, which I kind of love because, let's be honest here.
That's your brand.
And then it's kind of true. And the whole point of that is it's a text-plainer show, and the whole idea is that you should know it all, but you're going to hear it from me who is a know-it-all. So love that. And so the first episode, the day we're recording this, so this will be old news, but the first episode of Know It All is about to launch. And that's the same thing as basically Proper Care and Feeding, except there's no accusation at the beginning. I don't start out with every episode be like, "You're an idiot, and here's why." It's more like,
I'll believe that when I see it.
It's
Jason starting an episode without making an accusation that's incendiary.
So these are trying times, and so one of the episodes we were just going through like a cut with the editor today, and one of the episodes starts out with me like, "The next time I hear you say such and such, I'm sending my army to your house," and I'm like, "Oh, I recorded this it's January now. I recorded in October, like 2.5 months ago. That didn't age well." Already, and it hasn't even launched yet, and it didn't age well, and I don't know what to do about that. I also have another episode
you just add a disclaimer, right?
like recorded before anyone sent anyone's army anywhere.
Yeah.
And there was another episode where like we were laughing. So Anthony, my director, and I were laughing over this one thing where I'm like, it's basically about all-wheel drive systems, and we were making fun of Haldex systems because everyone seems to think like my Haldex thing can send 100% of the power to the back, and it can't. So actually, it was the same episode. So that whole intro starts out with like, I'm sending my army to your house, and since I don't have I actually have an army, that's an empty promise. Just like the promise your salesman made when he sold you that Haldex piece of crap. And we laughed so hard over this. And now I watch it back and I'm like, oh, dude, like I don't actually mean the cars are a piece of crap. It was just funny to say that way. And so now I have like, I called your car a piece of crap. And I am inciting another insurrection. I don't know what to do about this. So welcome to the world of what happens when you shoot something and then it lives forever in the editor's bay and hasn't launched yet. So anyway.
And I mean, you're having an inside joke with yourself a little bit, especially about Haldex. I mean, I know Haldex is garbage. It's just like front wheel drive plus rather than being
it's not, I mean, look, it's not garbage. If your desire is to not get stuck in a snowbank, right. There has never been a Haldex car that handled well.
Yes.
And that's the point. So no, some like that is and of course, because it's me and it's a tech explainer show, I'm putting on do not.
And that's why we prefer the Golf GTI over the Golf R.
Yeah, because at least it's honest. Like it is what it is. It's going to understeer. It's a front wheel drive car. And the Golf R, everyone kind of thinks, well, it's amazing. It's four wheel drive. It's going to handle like a 911 Carrera 4, but that's just not the case. So, but in addition to that, and then in 2 weeks, the big show, or no, in a week, whatever it is, next week after the know-it-all, the first ever episode of the new Jason Cammisa on the Icons launches. And that was a perfect example of how when I don't have constraints on me, I expand to fill all spaces. And by that, I'm talking about both my sweatpants and also production. So we have an episode that's coming up on the Toyota Supra, but I think I have 13 cars in the episode.
Oh, wow. The new Supra? I guess the old Supra. Every Supra, apparently, if there's 13 cars.
All of the Supras. I'm going to wipe the screen here. Please bear with me because it looks like it's maybe nasty. I don't know. There's some weird reflections still. I feel like it took apparently 13 cars to tell the story of what you need to know about the Mark V Supra. Look, I'm on one hand a year late, right? The car's a year old. There are updates for 2021, so that's it was a good time to come back in and cover the Supra again, because the previous one that I had driven was, how do I say this nicely, an uncontrollable, wretched, dangerous pile of shit on the racetrack. I think that was pretty good.
Which is not part of the Supra heritage. I saw someone complaining, or someone's like, why is everyone so hard on the Supra and the Z4 thing, but they're not hard about like BMW and Mini? And I was like, well, that's kind of a dumb question.
It's a totally dumb question.
I mean, Mini would basically not exist were it not like sort of somebody bought the remains at a junkyard, BMW, and like brought the company back.
Supra wouldn't exist if Toyota didn't make one.
Well, yeah, but Toyota is... Exactly, that's the problem. But Toyota has the wherewithal to make a good car that has nothing to do with any BMW. And that's not what they did. Just look at the Yaris GR and how everybody's freaking the fuck out about that. Like, what if they had done with the Yaris with the Supra instead?
You're one step ahead already. You've gone too far. The Toyota is the largest car company in the world for the vast majority of the previous 20 years. And if I walk into a Toyota dealership right now, I can buy a brand new BMW with a Toyota badge on it, the Supra. I can buy a brand new Subaru with a Toyota on it, the GT86. And I can buy a brand new Mazda, the Yaris. And that is really upsetting to me as a purist, that the largest car company in the world that certainly has the money to develop a car if it wants to, has chosen to purchase other people's stuff and rebrand it. Now, Scion FRS, Toyota GT, Subaru BRZ thing is a little bit less of a rebadge thing, and it was closer to a joint venture than those other two. Mm-hmm. But the Yaris is a Mazda 2, like built by Mazda with Mazda parts and whatever else. And the And the Supra, I still see this all the time. It drives me nuts. Where even intelligent, well done magazines like Car and Driver will say this. Blah blah blah. The Supra uses a BMW supplied engine. No, the Supra is a BMW supplied BMW. There's not a Toyota part on the thing, and so that was part of the reason why I wanted to do the video. I mean, I went to the Toyota's design center and sat down with the guy who designed it. And basically he just opened up right off the bat and was like, look, we had to turn this design into a Z4. So, there's a lot that people really haven't been told about that. And there are people still on the fence thinking that Toyota had some say in the development of this car. It's under the camera stand. I have a book that Toyota gave me on the Supra. And it was published by Toyota, given out to me. And it said that at the last second in development, Toyota realized that the car was going to have a 51-49 weight distribution. And so they had to take drastic measures. And so they went to BMW and asked for the engine to be moved back, and BMW moved the engine back 2 inches. This is the biggest crock of shit I've ever heard in my life. This is not the way it works. This is not how cars are engineered. And this is just absolute fabrication. You don't realize at any point at the end of a development of a car what it's going to weigh and where it's going to weigh, because everything is done with finite element analysis, and they know exactly where every 100th of a gram is in the car. And maybe it turns out at some point during the development of the Toyota version, when they're like, well, the rear end of this car is a little bit lighter than the Z4 because it doesn't have a convertible top, we're going to wind up with a weight distribution that's a little bit off, so we can use different materials here or there. But that's done long before the development is done. And if you think BMW is going to move their engine on their Z4 2 inches in any direction for Toyota, you don't understand how that was. By the way, there's work being done, so if you hear any strange sounds in the background, it's not because I had tacos for lunch.
Did you have tacos for lunch?
No, I didn't have salad. Like I said, I expanded to fill all spaces, and I need to put the fork down. There's still so much PR spin coming from Toyota, where they're sort of insisting that they had any part in the development of this car, and they just didn't. Toyota had no say in anything. Toyota had no access to the development of the car. They had no access to the engineering behind the car. The only thing they had was chassis engineers who asked BMW's chassis engineers to please accomplish X and Y goal. The whole thing is just absurd, and the story just needed to be told. But to do that, I felt like I needed to bring in a Mark IV Supra, because that's the legend. And then I'm like, well, if I have a stock Mark IV Supra, I need to have 1,000 horsepower Mark IV Supra with anti-lag that blows flames, because what are you going to do? And we very smartly rolled the tape and had me do my in-car segment of the Mark IV Supra the first time I drove it, the first time I've ever driven any sort of modified 2JZ anything. And the scene is just hilarious because I can't stop screaming and laughing. Like, I'm trying to deliver lines. What we cut out was me screaming at my director in the passenger seat, who was trying to direct me. And I'm like, this was basically the equivalent of someone directing someone's orgasm. Like, to put this in, untoward terms. I just started screaming at him, shut up, shut up. I'm on tape going, I'm having a moment here. Just shut up and let me have this moment. And he was like, but I want you. I'm like, shut up. And it was just awesome. That was such an experience to drive. And it was detuned. It was like 814 horsepower at the wheels was its current state of tune. And the owner was this like lunatic, nicest guy in the world who's like, you're not going to break it. Try. Just go beat the shit out of it.
Challenge accepted by Mr. Cammisa.
Yeah. So of course we had a Mark IV and then the modified Mark IV, and then I'm like, well, we kind of have to have earlier cars. So we got a Mark II, and then I'm like, do we get a 1 and 3? Well, no, because we already had a BMW Z4 there, which is the mechanical twin. And I had an M2 there because that's kind of part of the story too, which you'll find out when you see the episode. And then we had the Toyota FT1, which is the concept that became the Supra, and we talked to the designer for it. It was just car after car after car after car, and shooting it was
complex.
A lot. It was complex. But we did this with the GT500 that you were there for, right? This is one of those times where I'm like, to tell the story of how good a GT500 is for that episode of Icons, I had to have a Ferrari 812 to race it against, and I had to have a Hellcat, and I had to have a GT3 RS, and Jesus, we had to have an original GT500 on top of it. So I love doing this. I feel bad for the editor who's currently like locked in a basement somewhere crying a month later, and he still hasn't finished it because it's so long and there's so many parts. So he just texted me right now. I'm not gonna look because it's gonna be like,
I quit. Anyway. I'm going home.
Yeah. So I've been out filming, and what have you been doing? Selling GT3 Tourings.
Yes, I've sold 2 GT3 Tourings recently. Those seem to be very hot right now. I don't know.
To plug your services, because I can do this and you can't. And
yes.
I'm no longer an employee of ISSIMI, and I don't get paid for this friggin' podcast. So I connected my friends with Derek to talk about potentially selling a GT3 Touring after a certain auction site pissed them off. And I believe it was a total of 48 minutes before the response was, hang on, I think I have someone. And then the wire transfer was initiated within 20 minutes of that. So this was like, their heads were, this is my buddies, heads were spinning. They're like, but they were fully prepared for 10 days of like battling with armchair warrior commenters and having to take supplemental pictures and driving videos and all this other stuff. And the car is just gone. So thank you for that.
For $35,000 more
than the auction site thought would be a reasonable reserve. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Anyway.
So yes.
Thank you.
I think in that case, look, there's, auction sites are great. And, we've, I'm sure, mentioned names of different auction sites called Bring a Trailer. We've talked about BAT in the past, and it's wonderful that it's the single premier site to get as many eyeballs as possible. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's the right place to go sell a car, because there is a cost involved of your time dealing with asshole commenters. And sometimes brokers just have a network of people who were called and said, I would like a GT3 Touring. And then the transaction's just instant. So
it just depends what it is. Yes, we did. I'm very pleased with how that one turned out. We also, at your recommendation, did a Delta Integrale pretty well.
That's sold too.
And so it is definitely possible, and it's faster. For a lot of my sort of personal garbage cars, not garbage, like cheap cars, compared to some of this high-end stuff, I'd put them on Bring a Trailer because you need, it's a sort of esoteric car, and you can't just find the person who's interested in that car. There is enough people who are interested in GT3 Tourings, and I think Integrales, they're mainstream enough and genuinely collectible where you're like, oh yes, this is easy. This is an easy value proposition. But for something weird like my Daimler 66, Bring a Trailer was ideal because it's I don't know where all the people are who care about this car, but they're definitely on Bring a Trailer. And
you used the word people. As if there
person,
was
sorry.
Person. Yes,
that's Road and Track did a feature about that car when it was on Bring a Trailer, and they were impress the tens of Jaguar dorks who know what it is. And I was like, I'm one of those.
So good. So good. But yeah, you've sold 2 GT3 Tourings for friends of mine, come to think of it.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
And I did a third one earlier this week also, which I think might be a record for the most expensive GT3 Touring ever sold, potentially. I mean, it's probably not, but it was a very healthy price.
All I know is you sent me a picture of a contrasting stitching fuse box cover.
Covered in leather.
You told me about that, I thought you were joking. I genuinely thought you were making
it has a leather
up.
fuse box cover, and that's why the price of the car was so high. I mean, everything's leather.
Leather fuse box cover with contrasting stitching.
Yes.
That's not bad enough that the fuse block is covered in leather, but that there's a contrast stitch. You're going to have to insert an insert
yes,
of that.
I've got it.
Right. Yes,
it's readily available.
It's the most outrageous. I think I said to you, I'm when I heard the original MSRP of the car, I'm what did they do? Get pink air conditioning vents with purple polka dots and contrasting stitching between the 2 colors? And you're no.
Oh, that's kind of an edited version of what you actually said.
I don't want to know what I actually said. I have no control over my mouth or my keyboard fingers. You're going to be known as GT-3, if you keep selling all these Tourings.
Yeah, it was whale genitals, I think is what you said.
Covered in whale foreskin?
Yeah. I think that was
HVAC vents in contrasting color made of whale foreskin.
Yes. We got sidetracked from the Supra. Oh, talking about bad parents, because
what did I do to you? I'm not your daddy.
Wow, that escalated quickly.
You just called me a bad parent.
No, I was car company parents, right? Because you talk about like BMW and Mini, and then BMW and Toyota, and so again, our sort of like guardian angel in terms of content quality, your friend Mark, gave us a.
But it's all right. Let me just give you guys. Mark's gonna be watching this. He's gonna yell at me. So I know I'm gonna like if I ever call him a name, I just get a text with that name and question mark. So I'll know he's watching this when I get an Instagram text. But he, about a month ago, just texted me out of nowhere, and he's like, I had a couple ideas for your next Carmudgeon Show. And I was in the middle of something, and by the time I looked at my phone, he had sent this 13-paragraph long diatribe with 13 episode ideas in it. And they're all good. So I'm like, okay. And it took me a couple days to finally read through it. And so I just literally pasted it into the document that Derek and I have where we just throw ideas for show ideas in there. And I haven't looked since. And earlier today, of course, Derek is like, so what episode are we doing today? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm in the middle of another podcast. Like, pick one of Mark's. And then somehow we got on the topic of somebody making that stupid comment about like, why does no one have a problem when BMW makes a Mini? And that led us to one of the episodes that Mark came up with, which is good parent, bad parent. That there are some car companies that are just terrible stewards of brands that they purchase. Mm-hmm. And I think the best example of a car company that is a wonderful steward is the Volkswagen Group.
Yeah, I mean, just outstanding.
Yeah. So if you look at the success, although I just heard from someone that the Ducati offices just got raided in Mountain View.
I heard that also, yes. Ducati North America. Right. Something about their financial conduct, apparently. But that sounds kind of exciting, I guess. But in terms of product and like product architecture and giving the manufacturer, the formerly independent or the like not part of VW Group yet, manufacturer the opportunity to express themselves as the maximum version of themselves. I think VW does a great job of that, and they also like back it up with genuinely good engineering, and they draw, I don't know, sometimes too much. Like I think the Urus is an example of this, where they've lost too much Lamborghini-ness of it. Like we talked about this before about how the Lamborghini SUV should be something like the LM002 and the Mercedes G, where it's like this really strong statement piece that is a maximum expression of the brand as it was defined, in the past. And that's not what the Urus does. I mean, it's got like a parts bin V8, which is kind of disappointing.
It's a very German interpretation of what a Lamborghini SUV should be like, right? You could picture a bunch of Germans sitting around around a conference room table. And saying, yeah, well, as long as it's the fastest in the one of the group and it's slightly triangular in shape, then it'll work. And I don't think that's really that's a very German rational explanation for what Lamborghinis are. They have trapezoidal shapes everywhere and they're fast. I think that's silly. I think we think of Lamborghini as much more than that. So I think the Urus is probably the worst example of Volkswagen stewardship, because remember that the Lamborghini Urus is a Touareg. So that whole platform, No, I'm sorry. It's a Q7. So Q7, which is the Audi layout, i.e. the engine's in front of the front wheels, is now Audi Q7, Q8, Volkswagen Touareg. Then you have Bentley Bentayga.
Cayenne? Not Cayenne?
Porsche Cayenne. Mm-hmm. And Urus, and that's just too much. It's now they all have the same V8, although you can't get the V8 in the VW, but you know what I mean. Like it's just a corporate V8, a corporate platform, a corporate this. Q5 is the same way with Macan. So Macan is nothing but a Q5, but so the engine is again Audi, stuck in front of the front wheels, but Porsche developed its own transmission, differential, and full all-wheel drive system so that it's 100% rear-wheel drive based until the computer fades in front power, whereas the Audi is the opposite. So even though they're the same basic platform, the Volkswagen Group gave Porsche enough latitude to really make the Macan a Porsche. But I mean, look at Bugatti. Bugatti exists now for longer than it really ever did in the past. I mean, this is probably its longest run, 11 years or whatever. Not really, but I'm exaggerating, but not really all that much. I mean, the original Bugatti wasn't a 50-year run, was it?
No, it was like 25 years.
Yeah, so 25 years. The second time was one car. Here's the thing. You want to talk about a terrible steward of a brand. Romano Artioli, otherwise known as Romano Artioli, he's the guy who saved Bugatti, and he sort of purchased everything and did the EB110, which I've driven one. It was one of the only cars that's ever left me literally on the side of the road and having to take a taxi to an airport to go home. But really cool. I mean, that was actually no fault of the cars. Really cool car, but that was it for Bugatti. It was made one run of them, done. And then
they ran it into the ground a little bit. It's a cool car.
But the same at Lotus.
In terms of what? One car.
The Elise was the same guy.
Yeah.
He did the Elise, and then that was the end of it. And then somebody else had to come in and kind of pick up the pieces and say, all right, let's do it in Evora. And
he's a car guy, not a businessman. Yeah, I mean, and you need someone who is both and is willing to give a long enough leash for the company to express itself. And so that's what Lamborghini has done with Audi, because Audi bought Lamborghini in 1998. And we get the first cars, the Murcielago, and then you get people who are putting 50, 75, 100,000 miles on Gallardos, and they're now like genuinely good world-class cars, which is not what the Diablo was. I mean, the Diablo was like vintage Italian,
Diablo was Chrysler.
Was a Chrysler product. Yeah, it was during the Chrysler period.
And the Chrysler was and there was Iacocca, was a horrible steward for that brand.
Yes.
They ruined Lamborghini.
I mean, it was ruined already, to be fair.
They doubly ruined it. They buried it. I mean, it was dead, and they took the corpse and buried it. And you can't cost cut the shit out of a Lamborghini interior and make it work for like fat Midwestern Americans and think that's going to reflect positively on the brand. The only Lamborghini I've ever driven that I didn't like was a Diablo. I hated it. It was neither the crazy batshit lunacy, all fucked up in all the right Italian ways thing that like a Countach is, or any of the other cars, and then it wasn't any good as a car either. Like if you want to go full send crazy. But that thing had like a Dodge Neon dashboard on it. Not really, but it sort of evoked the Chrysler, like super light steering, and like it just wasn't what a Lamborghini should be. Maybe the one I drove was a piece of shit. I don't know, but it was just
many of them are. But they're coming into their own in terms of their values right now. In any case, so Audi did a great job with Lamborghini. They did. I don't really like what they did with Bentley, although I appreciated that it was commercially successful and that at least they have a certain sort of vibe. It has been commercially successful. I don't know. I guess I like the big cars. I have a hard time with it because I think what they did with the Volkswagen. So what we're basically talking about is that Continental. The whole Continental series is a Volkswagen Phaeton. Yeah. And I think it was a twofold mistake. Is number one, I think Ferdinand Piëch was a little bit crazy to think that the Volkswagen brand could reach high enough to be a $100,000 luxury sedan 15 years ago. I don't think he cared. But I think there was a twofold problem. Is number one, VW couldn't reach that high, and number two, Bentley should not reach that low. And so even though the Mulsanne was an absolute amazing Bentley in all the right senses, no one bought it. And I don't know why. I don't know if that's because the Continental sort of cheapened the brand and just brought its price point down, or maybe the Continental was just the right price point for that brand. I mean, it was very commercially successful, and it had certainly deeply outsold the Mulsanne. I mean, the Mulsanne is $400,000, so I guess that's your answer to why not many people are buying it. Although Rolls-Royces seem to do pretty well also, and they're a similar price point. I mean, look, Bentley's killing it now, and the big change to me is that the Continental switched from the Volkswagen Phaeton layout, which is actually the Audi layout. So remember that Ferdinand Piëch, the steward of the Volkswagen group, was actually the founder of Quattro, and he cut his teeth after engineering the 911, basically. He cut his teeth on Audi's Quattro system. So that sort of front overhang engine is his trademark and his legacy in a lot of ways. And so that the Phaeton and all the Bentleys were that layout, and now the Continental moved to the Panamera chassis. And the current
Conti, even though I think the sedan, the Flying Spur, is really weird looking, is magnificent to drive.
Finally, which is what a Bentley should be.
Yeah. Yes. And even the last ones, they were sporting enough. I mean, they were fast as shit in a straight line, and they just were these great high-speed bruisers, which is appropriate for the brand. But now I think they really differentiate themselves from an S-Class, because they're just dynamically unbelievable.
So VW's done a good job with Bentley. They've done a good job with Lamborghini. They've done a good job with Ducati, which we're not going to talk about because it's a motorcycle. They've done a good job with Bugatti.
BMW,
yeah.
I think killed it with Mini once, and then
and then they killed Mini after that.
Yeah.
I mean, initially
I think BMW. I think BMW. I think I must be frozen because Derek's not reacting to my.
Maybe I'm frozen.
I don't know. I think BMW did a horrible job initially when they first expanded into taking care. They killed Rover off. I mean, so they
ran Rover into the ground.
Literally killed.
They ran Rover into the ground, and they had all these visions about how it was going to be great, and they were just going to sort of let it do its thing, kind of VW style, but not with enough oversight. And just Rover was just wandering around, sort of lost and drunk in the dark, and then BMW kept losing money.
It was a neat idea in that BMW could expand into the front-wheel drive market without hurting its core business by buying the Rover brand and putting its engineering might into front-wheel drive cars. And that was one of the reasons they did it.
Yeah, but they did the first but not the second. They bought the brand and then they didn't participate at all in the product, and so the product just was shitty and uninspiring, and nobody bought it, and it wasn't good.
Right, but at the same time, they did put their money into the Range Rover.
And Mini.
Man, was that...
I mean, they took the two most powerful brands out of that group, and they did a great job of them. I mean, the L322 once. The L322 generation Range Rover was magnificent. I mean, what a just paradigm shift when that car came out. And both in terms of design, but they kept the original DNA intact in terms of luxury and off-road competence, and it still felt very British. But and so that they absolutely knocked it out of the park. I think they did the same thing with the Mini, where they were like, let's take the conceptual sort of identity and ingredients of this and represent it in a 21st century way. And then after that, it's got the problem that a lot of retro cars have, which is after you do that, then what do you do? How do you update that? What do you do with the new Beetle afterwards? What do you do with the Mini afterwards? Because it's retro and modified, or modernized.
Here's the thing: you need to be satisfied with not doing anything. It is a styling statement, of course, but what they didn't do is then redistill that brand into what it really meant, and then come out with other cars. They just sort of as long as everything in the Mini portfolio looks dorky like a Mini did in this character kind of a way, and is the smallest car in its class, we can go into every class. And that's how you got things like the Countryman. And I think, again, a very German boardroom way of thinking about it, convincing yourself, okay, so long as it's smaller than the competition by 1 centimeter, it's a Mini. No, that's not actually what it is. So Mini should have been the first to move into the next company to move into the smart space and the Renault Twizy space or some sort of electric space. They should be pioneering small urban mobility vehicles rather than just sticking with this one outdated paradigm of what they could be. You could continue to have the Cooper, and they should. I mean, it's great. There's a reason it was a legend and still is. But what about Rolls-Royce? BMW's stewardship of Rolls-Royce. What's your feeling on that?
I think they've done a great job, honestly. It's obviously not my sort of car, but when you get into it and you experience one firsthand, you're just like, wow, this car... Which is not what happens when you get in a Urus. You get in a Urus and you're like, ooh, this is a little chintzy and overdone. And then you get in the back and you're like, this is downright austere. How does this thing cost $300,000? It's really... I
have never in my life jumped in the back of anything and said, this is downright austere. Because I'm not a 94-year-old British woman, which you are.
Well, sorry. I'm happy to be here and to provide that perspective, since it's not one you could arrive at by yourself. But the point is that they're both $300,000-$400,000 cars, and you get into the back of a Rolls Royce and you're like, this is where the meat is. This is the reason why you get one of these cars, and it feels special, and it feels like it's worth the money. It feels really expensive. And they did a really good job of saying, like, what do people care about, right? They're interested in silence. They're interested in sort of like the absence of stress, both for the occupants and for the vehicle. And so it needs to do all of these sort of things. And they really are like, oh, it's handcrafted, and we're going to put lots of coats of paint on it, and it's going to be very customizable, and all of this stuff that makes rich people excited. And so I think they've done a good job of that with the Rolls-Royce brand.
I agree with everything you say, and then I'm going to completely disagree with you, just for fun. I think you're totally right. I mean, the Ghost and the Phantom are exactly what they should be. They are very much Rolls Royces in the way that even Rolls Royce was unable to produce cars
during the Vickers period.
Yeah. However, I'm going to say they've completely failed because they missed the boat completely. This current generation of Rolls Royce should all be electric. And you said it yourself, it should be silent, right? So if you take something like the Phantom, if you've not been up close to one of these cars, you don't realize just how enormous it is. It's a sedan with sedan proportions, but it's blown out to such a huge size that it's actually taller than a lot of SUVs.
Yeah, I think that when the Phantom first came out, they were like, the seating height position is exactly the same as a Range Rover.
Right, exactly. It's up there. And so in a very tall vehicle, you have a lot of room for the floor. And you could very easily have sandwiched an enormous battery pack in there, which would have done a couple of things. Number one, would have added weight, which is what you want in a Rolls Royce, because then you can do things with suspension to make it floaty and incredibly soft. It also adds structural rigidity. It also adds sound
silence.
You want
and right, it adds
you want
silence.
Things below you. And then an electric motor is the most silent and progressive waft. You want to talk about waft, which is the whole Rolls Royce brand. There's nothing more wafty than an electric motor programmed to never respond to what you ask it to do. And so I think BMW did exactly what the brand need, but they were not forward enough thinking, and they're going to pay the price. If they don't get
that's generally BMW's philosophy, I think, overall. Like, they don't have a really compelling electric offering still.
So I just had a Ford Mustang Mach-E, and I found this really interesting because I realized very quickly that Ford recognized its sort of golden goose is this Mustang brand, and they were willing to put it out there and say, we're going to put the Mustang name on this electric vehicle to get attention for it. And it works because everywhere you go with that thing, it gets attention and people notice it and they're curious about it.
Really?
That's a whole episode I'm about to do on Icon, so I don't want to tell the whole story yet. But Ford is willing to put their Mustang name on their electric car, and all the Germans have done exactly the opposite.
Right, they created a new brand. Yeah, they created a new sub-brand that has no history because they're like, oh, we're going to sequester it.
But here's the problem. You don't... I think it was Steve Jobs who made the point that if you're not willing to sacrifice your current product for a revolution, someone else is going to do it for you. So you have to be able to... Well, not for you.
They're going to do it instead of you.
Right, exactly. Fair enough. And the reality is, like, Volkswagen could just continue to have the Golf, and it could just be electric, and there's no problem with it. They did it. It was called the e-Golf and whatever. But instead, they're doing this ridiculous-looking i3, and BMW is doing these ridiculous the IDX cars, and Mercedes is not touching the S-Class. There'll be an EQS, and they all look caricaturish and cartoonish. And my point is, if your base cars can't look like that way, why the hell should your electric cars look that way? What are you doing? Like, what? Why would I want a Mercedes that looks like a cartoon? Like, if that were the case, regular Mercedes should look like cartoons. Same thing with Volkswagens. And so I think they're all just so slow to adapt. Rolls-Royce should have been the first company to go electric. And the realization that Rolls-Royce owners don't go do 1,000-mile road trips on a weekend on a whim in their Phantom. They're to go to the opera. They're to go, to be seen here and there. They go 10 feet. You don't need a big battery. It didn't matter. And I wish BMW would have had the
foresight.
Balls. Okay, different other stewards. Here's a premise.
So BMW, wait, before we leave BMW, so BMW has done a good job in some cases, but is a little inconsistent.
I think they've always done a great job initially, and then it's faltered. So Rover, they fucked completely from start to finish. Range Rover, they did one great iteration, dropped it.
Well, and then they sold
Mini
it
was
to Ford.
to Ford. I mean, you want to. So that's why I wanted to get to the Americans. Like, you want to talk about
Ruining
a company
things.
that killed everything it touched. So Ford forms the premier automotive group, which merges Lincoln, which is their premier brand, with
Jaguar.
Volvo, Jaguar, Land Rover, Aston Martin, and killed all of them.
Yeah, so let's
Like-
see. They bought Aston Martin or Jaguar in 87, I think, and Aston Martin around the same time. And then they got Land Rover from BMW in the mid or late 2000s. It must have been
I think it was
2004
late 90s.
or 5. No, because the L322 had a BMW
Oh, that's right. Yeah, the
powertrain,
BMW stuff.
and then they switched to a Jaguar powertrain partway through to reflect the change in ownership, which what they did for the 2006 model year.
With BMW computers running stuff. I mean, it was a complete disaster. And I mean, that's a friend of mine a friend of ours. I think you might know him. Had a Bentley that had was a Arnage red label. So it had the 6 3/4 liter.
The old
V-
Rolls-Royce
this is kind of
V8.
an aside. The Rolls-Royce V8 with a turbo on it, but it had it was 1/3 traditional Bentley stuff, 1/3 Volkswagen stuff, and 1/3 BMW stuff because of all the divorces and marriages
That's
and inbreeding
right,
that was happening.
because
It was
those cars
insanity.
had Audi mirrors and some Audi switchgear, and the non-red label Arnage was a turbocharged 740 motor, BMW 740 V8.
Right. You could get the green label, which is a 740 V8, or you
the
could
red
get
label,
the
which
red
was the
label,
old
which
Bentley
is the
motor.
6 3/4.
Yeah.
But there was VW parts. There was BMW. It was a nightmare, and all the computers had to talk to each other, and they refused to, and like whatever. And this was the same shit with Range Rover. I mean, you had a BMW motor in a car. You had a Jaguar engine in a BMW that I'm sure did not want to talk to anyone, and any of the other computers in the car. It was a complete disaster. But Ford killed it all. Like, if you think about every one of those brands under Ford, Lincoln, I mean, effectively dead
DOA.
on life support for the last 10 years. Range Rover, what did they do? Like, they slapped Land Rover badges or they slapped Ford badges on that LR or whatever and made a Freelander thing.
The Freelander, which became the LR2.
Oh, that was a wretched pile of shit.
Yeah, very poor.
And the Jaguar stuff wasn't that bad, but it wasn't that good either. And it certainly wasn't Jaguar. I mean, go drive a Jaguar S-Type, which was also a Lincoln LS. Could have been worse, but it wasn't a Jaguar.
Oh, yeah, it could have been
And
an
it
X-Type.
Also wasn't a Lincoln.
Yeah, they could have
Which
made
was
the
a Ford
X-Type.
Mondeo.
Yes.
Right? Which is a Ford Contour / Mercury Mystique. I mean, that is not what you do to a luxury brand. You don't it was a Cadillac Cimarron moment, right? They put a Jaguar badge on a shitbox entry-level compact sedan, and that was never going to work.
What happened with XE? So this is post-Ford.
XE is post-Ford. So XE is Tata. So the current XF, XE...
Did they shit-can the XE yet?
No, I think it's still technically for sale.
That's a shame.
think
Wasn't
I've
that
ever
car
seen
supposed to be the one that saved Jaguar, and it just kind of ended up being a random footnote instead?
So in Jaguar's defense, sedans are kind of dead. If you look at 3 Series sales, they're terrible. And if the leader in that segment can't sell, then I think it's not really a good sign for XE. The problem with Jaguar Land Rover products right now, under the stewardship of Tata, is that the Land Rover stuff is nailing it. I mean, Range Rover stuff is great. Land Rover stuff is great. All of those products are great. But the sedans have left to die on the vine. They're too old. And the bigger issue was that they got the Land Rover products get beautiful styling, and the Jaguar stuff looks like nothing, and their interiors are crap. They're just crappy, and you can't do that. The whole Jaguar brand, like internally, they're like, oh, Jaguars for dynamics and backroads prowess. And really, Jaguars are some of the best driving sports sedans of all time. But we never think about that in this country, especially. We think of Jaguars as beautiful, sexy objects with gorgeous interiors. Well, when they're not beautiful or sexy and they don't have a nice interior, there's no reason to buy them. And that's what we're facing right now, is the cars are old, they're plain, and they're crappy. And it's just not... I don't know if it's Tata saying it's not working, so just kill it off, let it all just wither on the vine, and let's put our resources in the Range Rover and Land Rover product lines. I mean,
which are not the freshest, right? I mean, both the Sport and the
you have Defender coming out.
That's true, but I'm just talking about the full-size Range Rover and the Sport are both kind of vintage at this point. Like the full-size Range Rover's been out since 2013, and the Sport's been out since 15. Like they're getting on in years.
They're getting on, and of course they have the variants, they have the SVRs and stuff like that. But they came out with a hybrid with the 4-cylinder. They came out with the different 4-cylinder Range Rover is a Land Rover, I should say, is quite the tall order. But I think they're working on the powertrain side, and also don't forget Jaguar has the I-Pace, which is that electric car, which is a commercial failure as well. So I think they're trying things, but they're still trying to find their footing moving forward, but at least the products, though they may be old over at Land Rover, are still compelling. I'd still buy any of the stuff that they make. Any of the rear-wheel drive stuff that they make. So the transverse front engine stuff, I like a lot.
Oh, the Evoque, yeah. You're talking, when you say rear-wheel drive, you mean longitudinal.
Yeah. And there's the little Range Rover's also, a little Land Rover's also transverse. Sport.
There's like a trillion different Discoveries now.
Not
or
the
something.
Sport, the Discovery, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're transverse also, and they're fine, but they have that ZF 9-speed transverse automatic that's just not good. But ultimately, right now, I think Tata's a good steward for that brand. Certainly better than Ford was.
A very high bar, which they did a great job of with the Volvos of that era also.
Destroying them?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, what's worse? The poor Swedes. What's worse? Ford's treatment of Jaguar
or GM's treatment of Saab? Exactly. Oh. Saab used to be such a magical car company.
Oh my
but
God.
In this era of consolidation, it's representative of the fact that with a sort of value proposition that's so sort of specific, it's no longer enough because the cost of developing a new car is so expensive that you can't do it for that small of a number of people.
But so here's the thing. You're totally right. Something like a 900, or 99/900.
Yes, the original one.
900 was batshit. I mean,
just
everything
weird.
on that car is
weird
and in all the awesomest ways. Like I love that thing.
Yeah, weird but not bad.
And the one that replaced it was very much a traditional car. It was an Opel. It was an Opel Vectra, and same thing with the 9000 was that Lancia /
Fiat Chroma, no, Lancia Tema, Fiat
thing, yeah.
Chroma Alfa 164, Saab 9000.
Exactly. So their cars actually became slightly closer to, or they became platform shareable, right, by putting the engine in the correct direction and all the other stuff. I wonder that if Saab could have survived just on style alone, just because the cars were just so cool, if they had been done right. Because let's face it, there have been many periods in time where Chrysler, for example, has done incredible things solely based on its styling.
Yeah, you're talking about the late 90s.
Today.
Oh.
I mean, I'm talking about the late 90s for sure. The mid to late 90s where
cars.
They had the cab forward cars. I mean, if you think about everything they made,
LHS.
including that neon, was gorgeous. The minivan was beautiful. It was absurd. So if Chrysler as an entire car company can survive just on styling, I'm certain Saab would have been able to do something. But they were run completely into the ground by infighting at GM. And by the way, let's talk about GM for a second. GM is, in addition to having killed off Pontiac and all the traditional divisions that we think of over here, Oldsmobile, Opel's dead, Vauxhall's dead, and Holden is dead. So Opel, everyone forgets this all the time. I forget this all the time. Opel and Vauxhall have been sold off to PSA, which is Peugeot Citroën. So now, it used to be when you bought an Opel, you got a GM, and now for the first time in 80 years, now you're going to get a French car when you get an Opel, which is a German brand, and a Vauxhall's a British brand. Like, that's bad enough.
So does GM not have presence in Europe anymore? Are they selling Chevrolets over there?
Well,
they
Chevys, which are mostly
12
Korean
Corvettes.
So they tried for Cadillac, which is never going to work. It's not good. It's not good. You think about GM being gone from that market. I mean, they're gone out of Australia.
What
Like,
are they
think about
doing?
they had
Why are they
Holden.
doing this?
They're, I don't. I mean, because I think mismanagement. How can you kill Opel? How do you kill those brands off? You
Yeah, I
starve
mean
them
that
of
was the whole
resources
deal
for
with
decades, but
with for GM was that they had a specific brand for Europe, so they didn't have to sell Chevrolets in Europe because the idea of a Chevrolet in Europe's weird, but an Opel is fine. It's just like it's a you know widespread car that seems to function well, that's designed in Europe to meet European needs. But,
right, and they didn't work here. Cadillac Catero was an Opel Omega,
Yeah.
but I think part of that is trend, is brand positioning and price. Certainly, the last of them, which was the Saturn, Astra, was an Opel Astra, and that didn't work either. So I think they realized that at both the top and the bottom ends of their spectrum, these cars just can't cross the ocean. It just doesn't work, and you're competing with the likes of Volkswagen and BMW and Mercedes and Porsche. You just can't compete in that market. And then to say nothing of Renault and Citroën and Alfa Romeo and Lancia and all these other brands that just, the slices of the pie just kept getting smaller and smaller to the point where it's
everything's converging on sort of like mainstream consumability, and I think the cost of developing stuff is so high now that you can't really afford to do this sort of weird stuff in the corner that these companies built their identities doing. You couldn't build a car like an Alfa Giulietta right now. You couldn't do something like a Saab 900. And so there was a really strong identity difference up until, I don't know, what is it, the 80s, I guess, between cars. Like you think about a Volvo versus a Saab versus a Mercedes versus a BMW, like really, really strong, stark differences between all of those cars back then.
Well, interestingly enough, I think we're heading back into another period where we're going to see that, because so everything converged into one type of layout, one type of steering, one type of suspension, one type of car overall. But now you have all these traditional car companies are failing, and at the same time, every time a big car company fails, 200 startups pop up. I mean, we have Lucid about to hit. So obviously Tesla's Tesla, which by the way is worth more on the stock market than the next 6 largest car companies combined. I mean, Tesla is just completely changed the face of the automotive industry. It's not a car company, it's a tech company. Now we have Lucid, we have Rivian, we have Zoox coming up, and that's not technically a car company, but it's a transportation company. We have Apple jumping into the game. You have hundreds of startups. This is like the Wild West of the 1900s. Of 120 years ago, where there were 50 million car companies and then were ultimately consolidated into a bunch of small ones. So it's not the fact that you can't have an identity for this. It's that, to use the Steve Jobs thing again, they've all failed to adapt, so someone else is going to take their place. I would buy a Lucid Air, having never driven one, but being driven around in one, over a Mercedes S-Class already. And the car doesn't even exist. But it's just, the S-Class is just old thinking.
As an old person, this makes me sad. I guess I'll just buy an old car, which is what I do. I've solved the problem. Okay.
Solved. Right. And an e-Golf.
Yes.
Which we haven't talked about in quite some time. I mean, we have on the last podcast, but I haven't actually asked you. How many miles do you have on your e-Golf?
2,100. Or maybe
That's
it's
it?
2,200.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm like now 15 or 18 months into mine, and I've been stuck at 4,200 miles for like 5 months because I've been driving nothing but press cars, and this poor e-Golf is sitting and sitting and sitting. So I have to now, I've stopped getting press cars. Like I'm doing every other week. So at least I get to drive my e-Golf and my other cars. So I figured you would have passed me in mileage by now.
No.
Apparently you're not going anywhere.
Have anywhere to go.
To 2020 part 2.
Oh, yes. What are we, December 42nd, 2020?
Exactly. Chrysler as a steward. I have a list of
just Lamborghini.
like things.
Did they
never
do
have
anything
any
else?
other brands? Like De Tomaso, did they like? Are there any other brands that they very quickly?
De Tomaso was Ford.
Was Ford
Because they sold them to Lincoln Mercury dealers in the 70s. Your Pantera. Maserati, yes. Maserati.
Chrysler TC by Maserati was quite the success.
The LeBaron, the how many trim levels of LeBaron could you have?
Bad, worse, horrible, terrible, shitty. Yeah.
I guess Maserati was part of Chrysler, or was that a joint project?
They were definitely in bed together. My get, probably should have looked this up before we started. But the
They're part
TC
of
was
Fiat
a joint
Group
venture,
now.
Right.
Fiat Chrysler.
Well, I mean, you want to talk about a steward of a brand that kills everything. Fiat. Like, here's the thing. I shouldn't even say that about Fiat. What you see when car industries are circling the drain is this never-ending consolidation.
Yeah,
So
just trimming model lines. And
right,
companies...
Like you'll know what the British... It was MG, Rover, Leyland...
so BMC, which became British Leyland. Yeah.
Which was how many companies all rolled into one, all failing at the same time?
I mean, yeah, it was like Humber and Riley and Hillman and then Mini and Rover and Jaguar and Land Rover, which are the ones that have survived. But there's all these companies the ones that I just named, which people are like, excuse me?
Exactly.
Armstrong Sidley might have been part of it also.
Oh my God.
But yeah, so we
saw that in the 1920s, right? We saw that the first time, all these consolidations.
Well, yeah, because when people started making cars, it was just like, oh, I'm going to make a thing in a shed and sell it in a catalog, and that was what you could do. And then, it started, there were companies that actually had service networks and dealer networks, and, which started to emerge, in the 1920s. I mean, there was just, all of the small players left the market once they became a real mature. And the same thing happened with airlines and airplane companies during that period also. I mean, probably it happened with computer manufacturers in the early days of the computer era also. I think
that's true.
It's
You're totally right. I mean,
yeah, it's just I think it's a common market dynamic as an industry matures. And so we're seeing that to continue to happen now even. I mean, like Lancia became part of Fiat if you're going to talk about stuff that's part of Fiat Group, Lancia became part of Fiat in 69, I think, and then they got Alfa Romeo in the 80s, and they got Ferrari. I think half of it was in the 60s, and the other half was in the 80s. Maserati, same thing. I mean, now there's just one Italian car company. There's one French car company. There's no Swedish car companies, like actually Swedish. Right. Koenigsegg. Sorry.
They Swedish? I don't know. I mean, and British. I mean, Lotus is Malaysian, right? There's not much. Although Geely owns Proton, so yeah, it's actually Chinese. We're just gonna keep seeing this, but I love that we're at the dawn of, as all of these stewarded companies just do this, and Volkswagen's obviously not there, but so many of these stewarded conglomerations of companies are doing this. We have all these new startups coming, and that's interesting.
I hope that creates the variety and divergence, because part of the reason why we, I think, consistently shit on new cars is because they converge on sameness. It's a sameness that we don't like, and there's not enough differentiation.
I wish I saw you a couple weeks ago except for Subaru. But again, Subaru is owned in part by Toyota, and
they're not exactly preparing for the future. If you think about electrification and Subaru.
No. And there's hybrids. I mean,
welcome to
Subaru
2000.
Is the new Buick. So Subaru's the next Buick for me. So when growing up, the slowest cars on the road were all like blue hairs driving Buicks. And that became Toyota, which is now becoming Subaru. Like every time there's someone in my way doing 10 below the speed limit, irritating my last nerve, it's friggin' Subaru. And that's
not
to me
Prius?
The mark of death for any brand. Not anymore. Not anymore. It's a fucking Outback. So the technology is getting older. The buyers of that car are getting older. And you're right. I don't see Subaru planning much for the future. But whatever, they're enjoying huge success right now. Like, it's what, like 59 months of consecutive sales records or some outrageous stat like that.
They have an actual identity. I think that's a big part of it. A lot of these companies just don't have much of a clear identity that is appealing at a large scale.
Symmetrical all-wheel drive, which no one even knows what it is. I mean, that's amazing. But whatever. I mean, whatever.
I have an active lifestyle. And my, in
your 60s.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an active boomer. I don't know. These are exciting times, but I can't wait for the traditional car companies to wake up. So that Mach-E was a really interesting experiment. I love the car. I really like it. There's a lot I really like about it. And I don't want to tell the full story, but the reality is, on paper, a Tesla is better in almost every measure, a Model Y. And that is not to say that the Model Y is more appealing or that I would choose the Model Y over the Mach-E. But the strengths of traditional car companies are nowhere near as big an advantage as the disadvantage of Tesla's inability to screw cars together. I mean, I'll tell you, so I had a pre-production Mach-E, and it was the worst panel gaps I've ever seen on any production car at all. They didn't give me anything that said it was pre-production, but I looked at the VIN, and it's pretty early. Shamed Tesla. The software bugs shamed Tesla. So they're all in that same boat together. No one can screw a car together with decent panel gaps at this point. They're all trying for cheap. I get it. The industry's changing.
What?
And also, the customer doesn't notice that.
Yeah.
But there are huge benefits that I will get into in that video to the Model Y over a Mach-E. And it's because traditional car companies have traditional ways of thinking. And even when they take their people and put them in these agile subunits and say, okay, we're going to allow you guys to work, as an agile subdivision, there's still people who are used to working in the old-fashioned way. And in that sense, the traditional car companies are bad parents to those new divisions and those new agile units because they're not bringing in people who think very differently. Or if they are, they're not letting them get away with it.
They're just beating them into submission so that they stay in line.
Right. The fact that Lucid that car is 15 years ahead of anything that I've seen from any traditional car maker is proof. So, interesting times, Derek Tam-Scott.
Yeah, what a time to be alive. Fortunately, I'm just going to keep buying my weird old shit.
I'm with you. I'm done buying stuff. But,
I'm not done buying stuff. It's just all going to be old.
I'm just done. I can't drive my cars as it is. I have too many of them. So I'm done buying stuff until the next one.
Yeah.
I just, I'm thinking about, should I sell a car or two, have fewer cars that I get to spend more time with, and then I drive anytime I drive any of them, I'm like, nope, never selling it.
I'm ready to do some restructuring. Stay tuned.
You're really good at selling. You're as good at selling as you are as buying, yeah.
Yes.
I'm really good at buying. I'm terrible at selling.
Oh, yeah. No, I can do both.
Yeah. You want a cabbie? I'll sell you the cabbie.
No. Definitely
I wanted to go to someone who, close by who I can fix it. I haven't driven it in forever. So, that's on the list of I could just sell that because then, the first time it's sunny and I have two friends that want to go somewhere, I'm like, I don't have a 4-seat convertible. I have to buy another cabriolet.
Your life sounds very difficult. You've got two friends? Wow.
Well, none that I can see at the moment because, if you've seen our COVID numbers, leaving the house would be instant death with no ICU capacity.
Yes.
But, 2021 has completely started off on a great set of events.
Stay tuned for more if we haven't died. See you next time if we're not dead.
We should do this more often. We should do this more often. By that I mean Carmudgeon episodes, not making everyone very depressed.
Oh, right. All right. Happy trails.
All right. So next time we will let's print out a list of Mark Burns's additional episode concepts, and we'll just throw a dart and see what it lands on, and do even less preparation than we did.
I would like to speak at length about the Citroën DS. I think there's a way we can do it.
Okay, in the comments, I want you guys to all decide whether Derek gets to speak at length about the Citroën DS. For the record, I think I kind of want to hear what you have to say about the Citroën DS.